Welcome everybody. This week we're going to be doing a review for exam 1 for History 1305. So this will be your first exam of the semester, and I just wanted to post this really rather brief video. I'd like to keep it within 5 minutes or so. Just review sort of guide, a way to guide you into preparing for this exam. And to get you ready to go and as ready to answer the types of questions that will appear on the exam as you possibly can be. So the first thing I'll say is that the study guide, this review session, these are not meant to be comprehensive resources. I have to throw this little disclaimer out there. You are responsible for all of the material in the PowerPoint lectures, the assigned readings. And so you cannot come to me after the exam and say, hey, something wasn't on the study guide. Well, I never said that the study guide was comprehensive. That's simply a way for you to see where my mind is at, what I think of as key terms and key concepts going into the exam. Now, that being said, that's usually a pretty good indicator of what's going to show up on the exam. It's unlikely that you're going to see a lot of material on the exam that doesn't show up there on the study guide. But just be aware that you can't say, hey, you didn't talk about that in lecture, or that wasn't on the study guide, and use that as an excuse for why you weren't ready for it. My answer is going to be, it was in the textbook or it was in the PowerPoint lectures, so you need to be ready to answer that question. So, with all that said, I'm going to start off with the exam format. You're probably, the number one question on everyone's mind is, what is the exam going to look like? Well, it's going to be conducted entirely in the Blackboard environment. We're going to use the Blackboard exam system, and the test will be comprised of 3 different sections. But these sections will be all mixed up, so you could get any of these questions in any order. But the 3 main sections on this exam will be the geography section, which will have 5 questions worth 0.25 points each. So in other words, a quarter of a point each, and when you get all 5 of them, that's a total of 1.25 points. There will be 20 multiple choice questions on the exam. Those are worth half a point each. And so when you total that up, those will be worth 10. Now, as part of the multiple choice, there might also be true and false questions. I count those all as part of the same sort of section of the exam. When you're doing a true and false, it's a multiple choice question. You only get to choose from one of 2 options. So it's still multiple choice, it's just true or false. So the final and most important point, the thing I'm going to be talking about the most today, part of this exam, is the term identification questions. So those term IDs are going to be worth 3/4 of a point each, or 0.75 points each, for a total of 3.75 points. So lots of points getting thrown around. Long story short, your exam is going to be worth 15 points total, just as it says in the syllabus. So with the geography questions, the way this works is a map will pop up in front of you, and it will say which of the following colonies corresponds with number 4 on the map, or whatever number is listed on the map. So there'll be 13 numbers listed on that map showing the original 13 colonies, and if the question asks you to identify number 4, on the sample map that I gave you in the review session, that would be Connecticut. So from the multiple choice answers, you select Connecticut. And that's how you get those points on the geography section. Really rather straightforward, but it is important that you familiarize yourself with the map of the 13 original colonies. There's not a lot to say about the multiple choice questions, aside from the fact that there's 20 of them and they're worth half a point each. They're really just designed to see if you've covered the material. But I did give you some examples of how I might turn one of those key terms, in this instance the Eastern Woodlands people, into a true or false or a multiple choice question based on the information I gave you all about those. So if you're looking at the sample questions that I posted up for you, the answer in the terms of the 4-choice multiple choice question, it says the Eastern Woodlands people inhabited the northern and eastern part of the United States, and they lived in blank communities. Here the answer would be C, decentralized. But I could phrase that question in another way and say the Eastern Woodlands people inhabited the northern and eastern part of the United States and lived in decentralized communities. In this instance, then this answer would be true. But I could change a word there and say they lived in the southern and western part of the United States, which would make it false. Or I could say they lived in centralized communities, making that false. So you're probably used to seeing those with all the standardized tests you've taken. This is not much different. But it is important to point out here, I'm not testing you for, do you remember how to spell this guy's name, or do you remember what day this happened in 1607? I'm looking more at big sort of picture questions. I'm looking to see if you understood the significance of a term that you're being tested on. I'm looking to see if you understand patterns of cause and effect. So the questions will mirror those sorts of those areas of foci, those areas on which I'm emphasizing. So that brings us to the last section of the exam, the term identification section. And I just want to start out by saying that this is where the vast majority of students lose points on my exams. It happens every single semester, and I've been giving this disclaimer since the second semester I started teaching here at UHD. I give term identifications in lieu of essays. And so the way that these work is I'm going to give you the term ID. It's just all you'll see there is the term. And then you are responsible for giving me 3 different points of information about that term. The first is what I broadly call the context. Here you need to tell me about the time period and the location that that term can be located in, where you can replace that. But sometimes the time period can be narrowed down to an individual year. Other times it can be a range of years. So for example, if Jamestown was your term identification, you need to tell me that it was founded in 1607. That's how narrow you need to be. But if it's the Atlantic slave trade, well, that's a little bit different. Then you're talking about something that happened over the course of 300, 400 years. So what we're looking at there is you could tell me it happened from the 1500s to the 1800s. Or you could be more specific and say 1460 to 1860, the generally accepted dates for that. The same is true of its geographic position. If you're talking about Jamestown, you have to tell me that it's located in modern-day Virginia, or you need to at least tell me that it's on the James River in the Chesapeake Bay, broadly. That would get you points for location. With the Atlantic slave trade, this is happening over the entire Atlantic, so you'd want to tell me that and say that it's occurring between Africa, Europe, and the Americas. And so that's how the context end works, and that'll get you 0.25 or a quarter of a point if you answer that correctly. Then we move on to the identification, and here is where you need to explain what the term is referring to. And so when we look at this, I pulled out a few examples here. The one I used is the headright system. And when I say identification, I am talking about a detailed identification. You can't say the Atlantic slave trade was where Europeans took Africans to be slaves. You need to be more detailed than that. Here you would want to tell me, basically why people are being taken, who's taking them, where they're ending up. You would probably want to mention the volume of people taken, like 12.5 to 13.5 million. You need to provide a little detail there. So when I gave you an example here of the headright system, I say the headright system is designed to promote travel to the American colonies by offering 50 acres to each man and 50 acres for each dependent who could pay their own way to the colonies. That is a detailed enough description of the headright system to get you credit. However, I put some examples of what won't get you credit there too. You can't give me just one simple thing where it says, the headright system was designed to give land to settlers, or the headright system was to promote migration to the colonies. Those are not detailed enough or specific enough answers, and they won't net you credit. And then finally, the last point of the term identifications, you're being asked to give me the significance of this term. Why is it important to the overall scope of American history? I'm not asking you about minutia in these term IDs. These are key terms that anybody who's taken a U.S. history class is going to have to encounter and understand. And so when we look, I will go back to the headright system as an example here. Why is this significant in American history? You could go with a lot of different answers here, and I do give a little bit of leeway in terms of the significance of these terms. However, I don't want to see generalities here. I don't like, it was important because it was really critical to the development of the colonies. You're not being specific. The headright system, you could say it was important because it highlights the problems of building a sustainable population in the early colonies. It shows us that people are simply not willing to move to these American colonies in England. But you could also, and I would think the far more pressing point of significance there is pointing out this immediate cause and effect pattern. The headright system's failure is what to bring immigrants into this New World colony is what leads Jamestown to turn to slave labor in the Atlantic in the first place. This is why America starts engaging with African slavery. So that shows you kind of what my thinking is. And then on the next page in your PowerPoint slides, I'm giving you examples of how I score those term IDs. You can get partial credit on those. But I went through and used the Atlantic slave trade as an example of how I score those particular questions and how you would go about getting full credit. Now, I do want to remind everybody that you have to answer these term ID questions in prose form. If you just list out information or put bullet points, you're not going to get any credit. So you have to answer these in full sentences with punctuation, capitalizing the sentence, all that good stuff. That is how I expect you to answer these questions. I want to remind you, I do this in lieu of a big long essay. I don't find those to be very productive, and I think that students tend to just give me a bunch of BS that is expected because I'm asking people to put together this really nice essay in the midst of an exam. It's an unrealistic goal. So in order to make up for that lack of writing component in our exam, I use these term IDs. So if you don't write it, you don't get credit. If you're just going to list things out, then you will not get credit for that section on the exam. So some other things to remember. These are just general points about the exam. Once you've started the test, you have to finish it in a single sitting. You have a window that opens at midnight on Thursday and will stay open till 11:59 p.m. Sunday. But once you've opened that window, you only get one shot at the test. If you close it down because you're going, I wasn't ready, I need to do this again, it's automatically submitted. If you get booted out because your internet connection is faulty, it is automatically submitted for grading. So it is really important you make sure you have a stable internet connection going into the exam. Simply getting booted out of the exam, if you've been spent 50 minutes of the hour and 15 minutes with the exam open looking at the questions, I'm not going to give you a chance to go back and reopen it, even if you got kicked out due to an internet error. Because I can't tell whether or not you went through and looked at every single question and then took a screenshot of it or something like that, and then went back and studied for it, and then when you reopen the exam, basically cheated. So these are the kinds of things that I have to really emphasize up front. You cannot retroactively come to me and go, yeah, my internet connection sucks. Sometimes I get booted. Well, then you need to use a different computer with a different internet connection. Because this is an exam. We have 4 of them in the entire semester. I expect that you'd be willing to take a few extra steps to make sure this is done right the first time. So you want to make sure that once you've opened the exam, you finish it. You can skip over questions and go back to them later, but be very careful about this. You've got to remember to go back. Don't just click submit when it's all done. And there is nothing worse than a blank answer where an answer should be in my exams. You never lose credit for trying to answer a question honestly. You will only lose credit if you leave something blank or if it's just blatantly wrong. And so what I'm basically saying is it never hurts to just guess. Take a shot. Even if your answer is nonsense, it's better than nothing. You might accidentally get some credit by guessing. Now, the only time where this isn't true, and it's really, really, really important, you are not to use any resources at all during this exam. So if I see a term ID answer where it's basically copied and pasted out of the course textbook, you're going to fail the exam, the whole thing, an automatic 0. If you go and copy an answer off Wikipedia because you don't know it, or you copy something off of Google, you are going to fail the entire exam, not just lose credit for that question. That is plagiarism and cheating. So I'm telling you up front, you are not to use your notes. You are not to use my PowerPoint lectures. You are not to use any websites, the textbook. No resources are allowed during this exam. I have little red herrings built into the exam, things that I kind of build in there to see whether or not you're using resources during the exam. And I use that to sort of tease people out. It might seem disingenuous, but that's what needs to be done in these online environments to make sure that people are being honest. So my strong advice to you is make sure you are not cheating and make sure you're not plagiarizing in this exam, because I can't tell you that there's nothing worse than getting caught for plagiarism. If you don't know the answer to a question, then make up an answer. Don't copy it off Wikipedia, because every other point you got in this exam, copying it off Wikipedia wipes all those points out. It's an automatic 0. I guarantee you that there's no negotiation. You cannot come to me afterwards with an excuse and say, I didn't know it was wrong. Or shoot, I meant to use that as a placeholder and come back to it. No, you've cheated already. Just by using it as a placeholder, you've used a resource during this exam, you've cheated. It will be an automatic 0. I cannot stress that enough. And believe me, as unpleasant a conversation as that's going to be for you, it's even more unpleasant for me. I don't like catching people cheating. I don't like them copying and pasting off a Quizlet or any of these other things. So just make sure you are doing an honest effort in this exam. It's worth less than the other exams point-wise, and that is designed that way because I don't want everyone's grades being sandbagged after the first exam. But believe me, you would rather have an honest bad grade that you can come back from than a big gaping 0 sitting in the grade book reminding you that you cheated on this exam. So please, don't do that. Another common pitfall I see is in the term IDs. When it comes to the points of significance and the identifications themselves, students oftentimes try to make these pointless blanket statements to fill space. Like I teach African history a lot. So one that I always see is Africa is a unique continent. Oh, what does that mean? That just means you couldn't come up with a good descriptive word for Africa. So basically, you've said nothing with that statement. Slavery was very bad. Well, that depends on whose perspective you're looking from, the slave or the slave owner. That is an empty ahistorical statement. It has no place in these kinds of answers or in exams. Islam is a religion that Islamic people follow. African Americans are American citizens of African descent. These are all pointless statements. Your reader knows that. And so I want to remind you, don't be general. Don't lack specificity and think that that's going to somehow net you magical points. It's not. Like I said, give everything a shot because you might get lucky and be close enough. But specificity is everything in those term IDs. I don't like blanket statements. I don't like generalized statements. They don't get you anywhere. So the last thing I'll say is please, 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 if you have any content-related questions, reach out to me in advance. Every semester I get students who come to me after they failed an exam and they go, yeah, I didn't really understand what this, and this was. And I'm going, well, why are you asking me 2 weeks after I've graded the exam and handed them back to you? It's too late now. You've missed out on the points. You need to be proactive. Come to me in advance with questions. You are never bothering me. You don't ever hesitate to reach out. It's my job as an educator to be there before you're tested on this stuff and give you the answers you need. Now, with that being said, I do have 200 plus students and teach over I teach 5 classes here every semester. I just want to make sure that you are I'm not going to come to you and reach out to you and go, oh, by the way, did you have any questions about the content? My assumption is if I don't hear from you, you know what you're doing. And so I'm not going to go out and track down every student before an exam, but I am always open to questions. So with all that being said, I'm not asking you to come up with questions if you don't have any and take up my time. But I am saying if you have a question, you are not bothering me at all. It is my job to answer your questions before the exam. So just be confident and approach your test with confidence and make sure that you're well prepared. Preparation is everything. A lot of what we deal with in history is just knowing the material. These aren't high-level formulas. I'm not asking you to do calculus or algebra. This is basically upper-level storytelling. And so what we're talking about, there's a lot of material, and I do understand that, and kind of getting through it and getting down to what's important about that material can be difficult. But the material, what this is all about is preparation. Your familiarity with it is going to immediately translate into how you do on this exam. So study hard, study smart, and good luck. If you need anything at all, feel free to reach out to me. As a reminder, it's always best to send me a direct email. Send it right. Don't use the Blackboard messaging system. I'm a lot slower to respond there. All right, well, I went to 20 minutes, which is well beyond my 5 minutes, but that's to be expected. So take care, good luck in your preparations, and feel free to reach out to me if you need anything at all. Bye-bye.